Are you satisfied with your understanding of sustainability? If you are not, imagine a journey together, a pluralistic one, with academia, innovators, startups, NGOs, all looking for solutions to the greatest challenge of our time. My name is Samuele Tini, and this is the Sustainability Journey. Welcome to a new episode. Today we are going to meet somebody who has been at the helm. The most VIP person I have interviewed, a former minister, and from the country where I was born, Italy. So great to have you here, Lorenzo. And now he's the academic director of Nativa Campus. Lorenzo, it's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine, Samuele.
Lorenzo, you have been a minister, so it's like we have to be formal in the podcast. But I want to know your sustainability journey is one of the very complete. You have been in academic in England, minister, and now you're on Nativa Campus. But we want to know a bit about you. Who is Lorenzo? What have you done? What is your background?
Well, okay. Thank you for that question. That's very useful. I am 47 years old and I studied history and economics. I'm Italian. I was born in Rome. And then I moved when I was in my early 20s. I moved to live in Africa, by the way, not far from where you live. And because I needed to get a sense of what life was outside of the European bubble. And I've learned a lot of things by living and traveling for over 2 decades in the so-called developing world. So I got a really strong passion for development, trying to understand how to get it right, how to fight poverty without destroying the environment, how to make sure that we could build economic systems and social systems that were in balance with nature so that we could live as well as we could without damaging anything around ourselves. So that has been me. I became an academic, initially in South Africa, then Germany, then the UK. As you said, I was then elected by the age of 40. I was elected to parliament in my home country, Italy. And a year later, I became a national minister of education, university, and research. I've been always very passionate about trying to make society more just. And I have coined this concept back in 2015, this concept of a well-being economy. So an economy is not obsessed with production and consumption of stuff, but an economy in which we set up companies, we generate jobs that improve the quality of life of everyone. And by that, I mean jobs that are dignified, companies that look after the environment, that look after their workers. We have more time for ourselves and our families and our communities and so on and so forth. And around this concept of a well-being economy now, many more countries and cities and companies are adopting it and putting it into practice. So that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic experience. And I can see, I've seen the Syrian in Africa and also going out of Italy. You have said an important thing, how we can transform economic system, especially here we read in Africa because we have the emerging market. So we are obsessed about the GDP. It's growing. I read today it's growing 5%. So IMF is concerned. But then the well-being economy, what does entail this new competence and how we can shift from our obsession?
Yes, that's a very important question. For so long, we have been told that all we need to do is to produce and consume more, right? And we call it growth. We call it economic growth. Now, don't get me wrong. When we came out of the war, the Second World War, at a time of significant deprivation, of course, I get it. Everyone was interested in just rebuilding, building, doing stuff. And that was necessary. But we forgot that that's not the end goal of everything, right? So, and also that if you produce and consume incessantly, you may ultimately destroy what is around you. We look at, just look at the amount of waste we have produced. Look at the fact that we have polluted our atmosphere to the point that now we're dealing with not only severe health conditions caused by air pollution, for instance, or water contamination, but also climate change, which is a direct consequence of our emissions. So production and consumption are important, but they need to be directed at a specific goal. And the goal should be improving the quality of life. If we consume, for instance, too many medicines, it means that we're probably too sick and we need to change something. If we consume too many cars, then there's something wrong with how we operate, right? If we consume too many weapons, then it means that society is not as happy, evidently, if we need so many weapons. So there are so many sectors in which consumption is not a good idea. And consumption should be limited because you don't want to live in a society which has so many problems and for which you may need weapons or you may need protection and so on and so forth against. So what I'm trying to say is that while growth was okay at the beginning of the current economic system, let's say after the Second World War, it became less and less reasonable after some time. And we see this happening also in developing countries. We already see the side effects of constant production and consumption. We see inequality widening. We see pollution becoming a serious issue in Kenya, in South Africa, in any other African country for that matter. We see crime rampant because of inequality and because of the fact that jobs are not being produced for those who need them, but only for those that are within certain sectors of the economy and so on and so forth. And therefore, the question of well-being becomes crucial. What kind of jobs do we want in a well-being economy? Do we want old jobs? Not at all. Some jobs shouldn't exist in a well-being economy. As I said, if people are more healthy, they need fewer medicines. So that's a good thing. If people are more secure, they need fewer police, fewer soldiers. They need less weapons and so on and so forth. That's a good thing. If people are eating more responsibly, probably they need less food, more quality food, less quantity of food. And again, and maybe more food can then be used for those who don't have it. Nowadays, unfortunately, in our current economic systems, when it comes to food, we have so much food for a few and so little food for the others. So we waste a lot of food. We're obese. We eat poorly. And at the same time, we have a huge impact on the environment to produce the food. And also, we don't have enough food for those who need it. So it's really about finding balance. It's about optimizing the resources we have and to try and achieve good human objectives within planetary boundaries and environmental limits.
And it's such an interesting concept. When you were talking, so many things came to my mind. We discussed about that. It's really how we have been growth obsessed and then we have not taken care of what was, and they taught us when we were in school, the externalities. Then in your view, because it's so difficult, maybe now the movement for the stakeholder capitalism, the discussion, we had the B Corp, we have a lot of work, but how nations can transition from this obsession to grow, media can go out of it, politicians can go out of it, and then now transition maybe to well-being, to sustainability, to a different measure of what is worth achieving?
Well, the transition is already underway. If you live in Europe, for instance, the European Commission has already implemented and adopted a number of directives that say very clearly to companies, to businesses, you need to be sustainable, you need to monitor impacts, and you need to reduce your footprints. So whether you like it or not, it's the law of the land. And if you're not in Europe, you may still operate in a market which is heavily affected by environmental, social, and governance, the ESG considerations when it comes to finance. So it's like, what I'm trying to say is that slowly but surely, the system is shifting already. Now, the question is, are we shifting fast enough? And that's when the well-being economy as a concept can be useful, because it's all about accelerating this transition. The transition shouldn't be seen as a necessary evil, like we need to do it because we need to save the environment. We need to do it because the European Union wants us to do it, or we need to do it because financial markets want us to do it. We need to do it because we need to build an economy that is better for ourselves. The current economy isn't. It's generating so many side effects, pollution being one of them, war being another. Like if you think about the wars that we experience, including the war in Ukraine, these are wars over oil, over gas. So these are polluting energies that are not only damaging the environment, but also destroying lives and creating instabilities around the world. If we were running mostly on renewable energies, we wouldn't need to fight against each other because the sunshine and the wind knows no boundaries. You have it, I have it, I use it, and it's the same for you. While gas and oil are limited resources, and usually countries fight over them. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to accelerate it. And the well-being economy as a concept tells you that if you're operating in a country, in an economy, where you focus, for instance, on public health, you stand a good chance to have better life expectancy, fewer diseases, less expenditure when it comes to national health services, and people live more happily, a longer life, and you need to produce fewer medicines. Isn't that a good deal? On the contrary, at the moment, our GDP obsessed system tells us that we need to produce as many medicines as possible because each and every medicine that is used, it's an input into GDP, even if that is only because people are eating poorly, because they're getting sick, because they're depressed, because they're mentally ill, because they work too much, and so on and so forth. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more stressed you are, the more sick you get, the more you consume, and the more you pump up the economy. That's not a good deal. We need to optimize. I said this about health. I could say the same about food. The more sustainably you eat, the less you spend, the better it is for you and it is for society. Instead, now we trying to produce as much food as possible just because it pumps up the economy, even when it's not necessary or it's damaging the environment. You name it. So the well-being economy is very much an optimistic understanding of what the transition is. The transition is an opportunity to do better and to build better jobs, to build better companies, to build better policies, and to have people who are more satisfied.
And it's such an interesting constant discussion. I really like the discussion about health, having worked now for more than 20 years promoting regenerative agriculture, fighting chemicals, and working to change our health system from treatment to prevention. And that is something that is still underway. And I want really to ask this, if you can share some example or case studies about the economy of well-being, where policies have impacted or have the potential to impact really the way we look at our economies.
So one of the key principles of a well-being economy is that you should measure economic developments not only in terms of how much we consume, but in terms of how well it impacts human well-being, right? And that means that if I consume something that makes me sick, that should be a negative for the economy. It shouldn't be a plus for the economy. Okay. So to put it very simply, at present, if I consume drugs and I get sick, that counts towards economic growth. In a well-being economy, if I consume drugs and I get sick, that counts as a negative. It takes wealth away. So by remeasuring what we mean by development and basically saying development is only happening when things get better, it changes our perspective on everything. Let me give you an example. New Zealand, back in 2019, when we were working with the government of New Zealand and they adopted a well-being economy framework, they decided to redesign their national budget law, which is basically the national financial plan for the country, by saying, we want to put money only in areas where we have the maximum impact on well-being. And the first area was children. So schools, health for children became the priority for the government because obviously from a well-being perspective, they realized that putting money to support children was the best way to support families, was the best way to build a sustainable future, was the best way also to support economic transformation in the country because they needed children to actually live healthy and have a good life. And they realized that the more you invest in children, the fewer issues you will have with crime, because in the long term, it's the best investment to reduce crime. It's also the best investment to reduce sicknesses that are very expensive for a country that has national welfare, and so on and so forth. So they really realized that investing in children was the best possible public investment they could make. Now, tell me how many countries have ever said that. Kids do not appear in conversations about finance ever, but the well-being economy budget forced the government in New Zealand to look at the area with the biggest impact, and for them, it was children. Another fast forward to Finland. They used the well-being economy lens to understand productivity. Okay, so they wanted to focus on increasing the productivity of workers in Finland. And of course, if you measure productivity only in terms of production and consumption, you want people to work more and more and more and more. But when you measure productivity in terms of well-being, the Finns realized that actually the best possible productivity was happening when people were working less. And so they proposed a reduction of the work week from 5 days to 4, and also having different creative ways to approach part-time, because they realized that by having people work less, these people would get less sick. They would have more time to spend in their families. They would give better education to their children. As a consequence, this would have a positive impact on community development, on safety, on security. Children that are not left alone are less likely to become criminals when they grow up. And so this is an impact on society. And so they reduced the work week. Now, you go to countries, unfortunately, like in Kenya, where you live, or in South Africa, where I lived for a number of years, and there you have a system of exploitation of workers, often that destroys families, brings mom and dad away from the children in these households that are often broken down because people are overworked. And that has an impact also on the upbringing of the children, on diseases, on social costs and crime that become huge burdens to economic development. So you see, the well-being economy helps you understand where the real value is and to take policy decisions that can help you improve the quality of life of everyone instead of trying to extract value from people and nature in the short term.
And this is exactly, for the short-termism mentality, extracting and squeezing out as much as possible for the benefits, but in the long run, pollution, health, that without thinking. It's also, I think, linked to the political landscape. So, you want to squeeze out, I made them growth with the 4 year, but then you don't think in the next year. And talking about politics, you have been also in that world. So you have been a minister for education, university and research in Italy. So how we can really integrate sustainability into our educational policies and curricula? Because change could not start with adults. Adults are very difficult to be changed, but with children.
Yes, I completely agree. And this is the reason why back in 2018 and then 2019, when I was a government, I decided that our education system needed change. One main reason why we do not understand sustainability is that we see social and natural phenomena as if they were distinct, as if they were separated, right? We think, oh, you know what? I don't care if I'm polluting because it's someone else's problem. It's my problem because that air and that water that I'm contaminating will be drunk by my children, by myself, or breathed by me and my family. If I don't look after my community, one day a criminal will come into my house. One day someone will rape my daughter. One day. So if I think that I can just push these problems out of my house, I'm mistaken. And why do I do that? Because in school, I'm not told that nature is a whole, that the system we're operating in a system. Often they tell you, if you're trained to be an engineer, how many times do they tell you, you need to build a bridge, but make sure the bridge is done sustainably, that you respect the environment, that you make sure that people are going to be protected by the bridge. They don't teach you that. They just teach you how to build a bridge. They don't care about the impact of the bridge. If they teach you how to become an economist, you think that they ever tell you what are the values and the principles that should go into that? No, they're told, they tell you, here is how you run a market. This is how you run a company. You'll need to make more money. No one ever tells you, what are you going to do with workers? How do you treat workers with dignity? How do you treat the environment with dignity and respect? How do you make sure that what you produce does not pollute anything? Those skills are not learned at school or at the university. And that's what we decided to do. We decided that we wanted to train our children from grade 1 to think in a systemic way, to think that every action always has a reaction, that if we pollute, we contaminate ourselves. If we are unjust, we'll pay for that injustice. If we leave them out and leave them behind, at some point, those people will come back to us as a problem in society. That poverty is not just unfair, it's also suboptimal and inefficient in a society because it's a social problem that we shouldn't have. So understanding how things hang together helps students realize that if you want to become an economist, fine, you'll need to know a lot about biology and ecology because there's no way you can run an economy without considering the planet and the environment from which we take the resources. If you want to become an engineer, fine, but you need to know a lot about conservation. You'll need to know a lot about the atmosphere, and biology and the environment, because every time you build something that has an impact on ecosystems, you cannot ignore the bees, the ants, and the mushrooms and so on. Otherwise, you contaminate the land on which you rely to produce the food. So again, it's teaching how to understand systemic relations that is crucial. And this is what we did in Italy in 2018, 2019. And many more countries are trying to do that, changing their academic curriculum in schools and universities so that our understanding of systemic relations is not lost in this obsession with sectoral expertise in this obsession with disciplines, we should not lose the fact that things relate to one another. And you can only be a good engineer if you're also understanding the environment. You can only be a good economist if you also understand society. Otherwise, you're going to be a terrible expert in one field who is completely ignorant about everything.
And it's really an important part. As I recall when I was doing my MBA in Warwick, I've been enrolled in the first ever sustainability course of the MBA. It's really something that it is so important, and it's just starting to change. But for many years, we have trained very good technical professional without, let's say, holistic or overall understanding of the system. And you have also been in academia. I want to ask a bit about your past in the war. So you have done the Institute for Sustainability in the UK. So how do you see now academia? How we can foster the new generation of leader? Which changes that are needed to really make that shift?
I think the role of academia is essential. The role of schools, I would say the whole education system is essential. We do need to train leaders for the future. Unfortunately, we're still training leaders for the past. And this is not just a moral consideration. I think it is unfair to train. We have a moral obligation to build the leadership that we need going forward. But it's also an economic. If we want the future companies to be sustainable, if we want to think differently in terms of how we use technology, we need to build those skills. And if you don't teach our students the right skills for the future, you know what happens? They're going to come out of universities. They're not going to get a job because the economy has changed in the meantime. Okay, so I'm still, surprised that so many people go and study chemical engineering in the oil industry. Wake up! The oil industry is done. Soon, you're not going to be able to actually get a job in the oil industry. So you may want to become a chemical engineer in the green chemistry industry. So learning new things, getting new skills. If the university is charging you to teach you something from the past, you should get that money back. That's wasted money. You're not going to be able to use it by the time you graduate. So there is a moral obligation and there's an economic obligation. Universities are there to develop the skills that are needed for society to improve, but also for people to get jobs. At present, many universities are not doing either. They're not performing that moral imperative. And at the same time, they're stealing the money from their students because they give them skills that are not going to be needed. So I really believe it's essential, because if you don't change your mindset, your mental frameworks to understand this, you're not going to be able to have that innovation that allows you to build the next generation company, that allows you to be, that develops the great idea that can solve a lot of issues. In order to have that ability to innovate, you have to be taught in a certain way. You have to be open-minded, and that can only happen in schools, which is the reason why in my new role, as I said, I started the Institute for Sustainability in the UK after spending a couple of decades in Africa doing this on the field and getting involved in politics. I did in the UK. Now I'm back in Italy, and I've just developed a new training academy for business leaders. Now, I want business leaders to rethink everything about how they run it, to rethink capitalism, to rethink how they operate, to rethink performance, to rethink productivity, to rethink, success. And I've developed this training academy in collaboration with Nativa to be able to have a place where business leaders who want to think differently about business can go and acquire the right skills and mindset.
And it's so crucial, the work that you're doing, especially Nativa is one of the pioneers of sustainability in Italy, the pioneer of B Corp movement in Italy. And it's really important how we can rethink capitalism and how also we can have new type of business leader. And especially I want to ask you this, in the wake of the new wave that is coming and getting us almost drowned, the EI revolution that is widespread disruption, how we can have a model that is focused on well-being to respond to this disruption, to avoid that this new wave will just reflect the mistakes of the past.
That's a very crucial point, and I don't have a clear answer to that, but I can tell you one thing for sure. I've been researching AI. I've been working with AI companies for the past few years. we are witnessing a fundamental disruption in how our economic system operates, perhaps our entire society. For the first time, we may be in a position to build artificial intelligence, self-aware mechanism that could really challenge a lot of things we do. Certainly could challenge a lot of jobs. We know very well that since ChatGPT came into play, like a lot of people lost jobs because you don't need a copy editor anymore. You have ChatGPT doing it for you. In some case, you may not even need a journalist or a creative because you can get a software, or in this case, a large language model to do it for you. And the same applies to many other areas, graphic design. Some people say even the movie industry may actually completely revolutionized because you don't really need special effects. They can do it for you probably one day. We may not even need actors anymore. They're going to be computer generated. But what I'm trying to say is that it has certainly a disruptive impact on the market and on our jobs. And how do you do that? How do you make sure that that is limited? It is limited by trying to develop an economy in which customization and local services are more important than global services. Let me put it in a less complicated way. If I want a nice gelato made with a certain flavor, only a local artisan can do that. If I want a gelato that tastes the same everywhere, it's pretty shallow and not really that interesting, standardized, then AI can do it for us. You see, the beauty of an economy that is embedded in a community where jobs are meaningful because they're special, because they're unique, because your teacher is your teacher, knows you very well. If you want to learn in a standardized fashion, AI can disrupt that economy. But if you want to learn in a customized fashion with someone that knows you, you can only do that with a human teacher. If you want my good gelato, only the artisan around the corner can do it for you. If you want the mass-produced gelato, then a big corporation with machines can do that for you. And the same applies to everything. At present, unfortunately, most of our mass consumption, they're not based in customization. And in those economies, AI can be very disruptive and destroy millions of jobs, become unnecessary. In an economy that is based on well-being, where we are more embedded in our communities, where production happens locally, happens with a certain taste and attention to local dynamics, AI tends to have a much less disruptive impact. And in some cases, it becomes an enabler, actually. Like you can improve certain production processes by having algorithms or large language models help you, but it doesn't disrupt it because the human leadership is still essential. It's what gives its uniqueness. So in my view, a well-being economy is an economy that is unique to the place where it takes place. And the AI can do much little damage. The current growth economy is a globalized economy of standardized processes. AI can absolutely destroy that because in standardization, computers are better than humans.
And it's really a very strong point now on how to embrace a totally different economic model. It will also help to make it more human and then, of course, more healthy and less polluted and also more happy, I would say. And looking ahead, the discussion in the movement of sustainability, especially with the recent backlash and people saying, from slogan like let's drill or other slogan, no ESG and others. So what trends do you foresee in this war? So the economic policies, the new forces, and necessarily imperative of sustainability, because otherwise the planet will not be there maybe in the next 20, 30, 40 years.
Yes, let me disagree with you. I think the planet, the planet will be there. The planet will be there for billions and billions of years. Maybe humans will no longer be there.
That's the thing. Yeah.
But this is crucial because the sustainability imperative is not for the planet. I'm telling you, the planet doesn't care about humans. The planet has been around long before humans were developed and will be around maybe as a very unlivable planet, but for much, much later. So the planet doesn't care about what's going on. We should care about it because it's our own extinction that is at play here, our own survival that is at risk. And I see what's happening in the world. I see, what's happening in the United States. And obviously this is going to have a negative impact, I suppose, especially in that country. It's a bit like when we quit smoking, I quit smoking because I never smoked, but I think, we quit smoking because we realize how damaging. We don't quit smoking because the neighbor is quitting smoking, right? And the fact that our neighbor goes back and says, you know what, I'm going to start smoking now. It doesn't change who I am. I realized that smoking was bad for me. I'm not going to start smoking again just because my neighbor does. And I think it's the same, should be the same for Europe. If the US wants to go down the drain and destroy itself and pollute its water and make its own people unhappy, let them do that. And we are going to do something different. It's already happening. I mean, like I keep reminding our students, the average American lives much less than the average European. In some cases, it lives even less than the average, South American citizen. They already have a system that, in my view, is the antithesis of well-being. They work much more. They spend much more. They're much more obese. So if they decide to go back to drilling, and if they decide to go back to using as much oil as they can, it's a pity for the global atmosphere, but let them do it. We shouldn't do it. We shouldn't do it, just like we don't go back to smoking just because our neighbor does it. Once we have learned what is good for ourselves, once we've learned how it's beautiful to live in a country where there's more social justice, there's more peace, there's more harmony, people have more free time to do a lot of things. Why would you give that up just because someone else is changing his mind? So that's my message. My message is, first of all, we're not doing it for the planet, we're doing it for ourselves. And secondly, if a trend is changing around the world, that doesn't mean that you have to change too. There are so many stupid trends around the world that come and go. I think we've learned that living in a more harmonious and sustainable society is simply better for everything, not just better for the environment, better for ourselves. What would you give that up?
And it's such a powerful message. I really like, because it puts back agency in our hands, and the choices that people can do, rather than just pointing at, oh, China is doing that, India is doing that, US is doing that, like pointing finger, but really we do different. And then if they follow, we follow. If no.
Exactly. We do it differently. Yeah, we do it differently. And we may even stand a very good chance to become more innovative and to develop those technologies that are going to be much more needed going forward. At some point, let me tell you, someone decided that trading horses wasn't lucrative anymore and decided to invest in different mobility technology. Some people probably went back to horses for some time. So people thought, come on, vehicles will never work. People have been on horses for so long. I don't think they made a good investment. I think those that invested in alternative vehicles made a good investment. And the same is happening now. Things change and we need to embrace the future.
Yeah. And definitely we hope also the emerging market like Kenya, that in the energy sector now is 90% renewable. So they leapfrog the old models and going towards a different way. So I would really, impressed by the depth of the conversation, Lorenzo. It's really been a pleasure and honor having you. And I think we should book you for another discussion, maybe later or next year, to see how your campus and your work with the executive has transformed the economy and the thinking of corporate world, especially in Italy. Thank you so much, Lorenzo. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure for me too.
Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.